Wish I knew how to quit you.
Howdy people of the internet. Today I'm feeling my inner horse girl, and so I want to paint some horses. Yesterday I went on a walk with my mom, and I live in like suburban hell, like think the Stepford Wives, but my house backs an open space with a bunch of cows and horses, so it's sort of like half a home on the prairie. I've been feeling a little horse girlish lately. I love cowboy stuff, so I figured why don't I make a nice little piece about horses? So let's go. To start with, everyone let's say a prayer that I don't get any paint on my clothing. It's going to happen. I think I'm gonna have to wear the smock. I'm like the Pizza Hut employee. I need lip gloss. Alright, cowpokes, let's get this rodeo started. That is the plan, is purple ponies. First I need to get rid of this white. I'm scared it's gonna explode. Blue. Let's do a big hunk of white. Then the Sarah Magic Sauce, bright pink. The reason I like to put the paint directly on the canvas is because I'll waste a lot of my palette space. I'd rather just not deal with it. I'd rather just put it directly on. And if it's like uneven and imperfect, then that's fine. I don't need it to be perfect. Right now I'm like messing with the sky since I'm planning on making it into like looking like a stained glass window, because I always like to do something with my skies. I think skies are like just the biggest area of blank space in a piece where there's no texture to play with. So for me, that's where I like to insert my own interpretation of whatever's going on. Like if you look back there, the sky is like a quilt in that one. It's like geometric shapes, it's whatever. So right now I'm just scrubbing out the acrylic because I kind of like the look of this thin, washed out, scrubbed out acrylic. Like this translucent look it has. And then I'll layer like thicker paint on top of that, and I think it'll have a really nice effect in the end. We'll see. After the hard part of this painting, which is figuring out what the hell I'm going to do with this stained glass, a lot of my pieces have been like increasingly geometric, which is not good because I'm so bad at making nice, precise geometric paintings. But, you know, we'll figure it out. I've developed this method with like just tracing geometric objects so I don't have to measure, because inevitably every single time I measure, like, oh, this box should be this big, every single time it's off. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just physically cannot make something straight on the first try in the right size. I think it's just because I don't have that like builder's brain, but I try. Like, I'm not that great at sculpture. I hold my own, but I'm not awful, but I'm not great either. It's probably one of those things though, if I just like actually wanted to work on it, I could probably get good at it, but I just never have kind of grown up in that kind of environment, so I just don't have any experience, but I've been drawing for forever. Today the colors I'm using are titanium white. Golden's the best quality stuff, so that's what I use. Cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, fluorescent pink, magenta, and my favorite alizarin crimson, primary cyan, ultramarine, Prussian blue hue, and the forbidden color, carbon black. I don't put black in my palette all the time, but sometimes I do. Today is going to be one of those days. We'll see if I end up using it much. Mostly my favorite darks are like this and this combined. I really like a dark purple that it makes. Sometimes I add yellow to it. Alright, first things first is choosing a horizon line. I think about there is good. So first step is I'm just going to try to really roughly block in colors. And I'm feeling like doing really scratchy stuff, especially for this grass. I'm really letting the colors sort of layer over themselves. See, look at how ugly this color is. It'll look so fun in the end, I bet. So just below that, it seems to get darker and warmer, so I'm going to mix another ugly shade. Get those like nice throw-up colors. That's what we're going for. It gets like really dark here, so I'm gonna do that. And since it gets darkest in the front, so I want to make sure I note that. I'm gonna dull this back a bit with some purple. It gets like the most saturated blue like right here. See, you'll notice I'm doing this crazy person squint because it helps me see, guys, I'm telling you. And then just for funsies, pink! I need pink. So it'll be like this sort of like X of hue going this way into like another direction, and then the other half will be going off into this direction. We're gonna go real dark here because I get a little shy about my values sometimes, and it ends up biting me in the butt. So yeah, right now I'm just trying to focus on the values. This is like the hardest thing for me. I don't know why, but I just can't see value all that well as compared to like hue. For some reason, value like trips up my brain, and I always get it wrong, and I have to always like go back and fix it. I'm a little bit scared to touch the sky, but I'm gonna do like a tiny bit. It's like a light pinky yellow. So we're gonna like outline some of that because this needs to be way lighter. 2024 was really the year of country music, huh? Like, what was that about? Everyone and their mother was listening to country music again, and I'm like, oh. And then looking back, I'm like, maybe the Trump thing should not have been such a surprise given like the uprise in interest in Western imagery and culture and things. Which is not to say that like Western stuff is inherently conservative. Clearly not. I mean, I'm here. But I don't know. It's just interesting to compare like how things have been changing over the last couple of years. It's all about that shift I talked about in one of my other videos. So right now I'm just blocking in the shape of this horse's head. And I'm really just trying to get the most accurate and simplistic shapes and shadows. I'm like, how do I describe what this horse looks like in as few shapes as possible? And I'm like trying to focus almost on the silhouette of the horse. Mira, the horse is here. Also, fun fact, I'm allergic to horses. Why is it every video I'm just painting something I'm allergic to? It literally is. It's cats, horses, fish. That's like my current roster. Dogs. I'm like mildly allergic to dogs. But apparently I just love to paint everything that makes me sneeze. That would be kind of a fun series of painting everything I'm allergic to because the list is stupid and ridiculously long. Okay, this horse's butt is like facing us. Horses are built kind of weird. Does it look good or bad? I can't tell. I have had like a long relationship with Western art. I started getting into it really when I was in 10th grade. I had a really awesome US history teacher, and he taught us like all the stuff about US history that a lot of textbooks leave out. So he was very inclusive of like queer history and people of color and like how they've been erased from history. And one of the biggest units that we talked about this was the Wild West. And of course, we were extensively covered how, you know, the Native Americans were genocided, and that's a huge part of the West, but also like how the cowboy narrative is much different from how it's represented in Hollywood. I also have to mention that there has been this great myth that Native American people have essentially disappeared due to manifest destiny, which is absolutely not true. Native American people get treated like they're these like relics of the past when they're like a living, breathing humans who exist today. So I definitely need to mention that like Native American people are not a thing of the past, and you can't talk about the West without talking about this kind of stuff because everything has a deep, rich history, especially in America. So I just have to mention that up front, and then let's get back into talking about cowboy stuff. There's a really great videos on these subject matters by Kaz Rowe. I'll link him in the comments below. Basically, cowboys were not these like individualist, like rough riders, like going around and shooting random people. They were essentially like members of the working class, and they had to go on these long trips, much like Brokeback Mountain, where you're out on the plains all day by yourself with nothing but like you and the elements and your horse and your cattle and the guy you're riding with. So a lot of queer people saw this as a sort of opportunity to like go and sort of live on the fringes, and like you can kind of be yourself in the middle of nowhere, and that's like a thing that Brokeback Mountain touches on, and that's sort of part of the premise of the movie. There's several cowboy movies. I've seen a fair amount of them. Brokeback Mountain is obviously my absolute number one favorite. God's Own Country isn't quite a cowboy movie,
but I sort of classify it in like the same genre of like it's like a country movie more than it's not western because it's set in Europe, and it's definitely deals with like it's interesting, it deals with like racism and xenophobia in like from a European perspective in a really odd way in my opinion. But I don't know, I'm not a European so I can have the most nuanced opinion about it, but I like that movie okay. It sort of has the same plot as Brokeback Mountain, but it's set in Ireland. It's got the guy from Challengers, I think, in it, and he's really hot. So being a cowboy was usually not a super glamorous job. It was like definitely one where you were always poor and you were always in awful working conditions. Most of the time, people were also non-white, so it was a lot of like former enslaved people and like Mexican immigrants or indigenous people or gay people or incarcerated people. So it's usually people who have been pushed to the fringes of society and sort of have no other options. Due to all these various factors, there just weren't many women around, and this led to men forming partnerships between each other, which kind of allowed for gay relationships and queer relationships to be more accepted. And just because like lesbian history in general isn't as well documented as gay male history, just because like society always seems to be able to stomach female relationships more than they do male relationships. But actually, one of my favorite painters was sort of this like lesbian cowboy in France, and her name was Rosa Bonheur. And she was a lesbian, and she like spent a lot of her life teaching women how to make economic decisions for themselves. And she was an artist, and she lived by herself, and she had to get permission from the government of France to wear pants. And she would cross dress as male and sneak into these various horse fairs because she loved cows and she loved horses, and she would always paint them. And she preferred them to people, she said. And her most famous piece, I saw it in the Met a couple years ago and it just blew me away. But her most famous piece is called The Horse Fair. And she's got herself tucked right in the middle of it, historians think. And this is supposed to be her dressed as a man. So, little fun fact, even though you might not know her name, she was definitely one of the most prolific artists of the time, which is saying a lot because she was a female artist and a lesbian one at that. And she was very prominent in this era of realism where painting was really wanting to move towards like the everyday and like the pastoral. So her paintings of cows and horses in these like pastoral scenes really fit right into the time period and what was going on. And in the art world, she lived with a woman for 40 years, and then after her partner died she got with a woman who was like 30 years younger than her, which is kind of interesting. So she was a cougar as well. She made her like salon artistic debut at the time, which is what they would do in the art world. Like France was the big hub of the art world, and the way you got your foot in the door was basically exhibiting at these prestigious salons. And this was like during the academic tradition, and that's how she got her start, and that's how she got noticed by Queen Victoria, who ended up becoming like a lifelong patron of hers. Which is kind of hilarious because Queen Victoria didn't include lesbians in her like acts against homosexuality simply because she just didn't believe it existed. So during the 20th century, a lot of war happens, and a lot of young American men are just sort of disenfranchised with their experience in the war, but they also want to like harken back to like the ye old good old days. We're always harkening back to the good old days. So back then, that basically manifested in the idea of like the ideal folk hero of the cowboy who's like this solo masculine guy, and that's sort of where Brokeback Mountain comes in.
Brokeback Mountain is a 2005 movie starring Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's directed by Ang Lee. And it details this beautiful and tragic love story between these two like domineering masculine cowboy roughnecks in Wyoming in the 1960s. And it details their sort of affair over like a 20-year span. And it's one of the most like famous and like formative gay movies, especially because it came out in the time that it did before gay marriage was legalized. And it's really interesting watching like the press stories and stuff of like Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger talking about what it was like to portray a gay man and like how much pushback they would get for it and how they would have to defend it, being like it's not a movie about being gay, it's a movie about like being human and like being in love.
This is disgusting.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I think yeah, I think it's a real shame. Well, I think it's immature for one, really immature. But I think it's an incredible shame that people go out of their way to discuss or to voice their disgust, I should say, or negative opinions about the way two people wish to love one another. I mean, come on.
Watching those interviews, it's just really commendable to like see two straight dudes like sort of defend the movie the way that they did and do it, in my opinion, very eloquently. Brokeback Mountain to me has a really unique perspective on like American masculinity. Brokeback Mountain is set in Wyoming, so I have an especially strong love for it because it looks just like where I'm from, because it's like, you know, not very far apart in the whole grand scheme of the United States. It's like the same mountain range, same area. And I saw it when I was a freshman in high school, and I've been obsessed ever since. I've probably seen it 100 times. It makes me cry pretty much every time. This is hilarious, I just gotta say. I love Brokeback Mountain. Oh my god, it gets worse and worse. I've watched it on the flight like probably twice, and every time I'm just like sobbing by the end, and like the tent scene comes up and I have to like put my hands over my screen and like look at it like that, so the grandma next to me like doesn't watch like the sex scenes that I'm watching.
Hell yes, I've been to Mexico. Is that a fucking problem?
But I also think it's a really interesting take on how like this sort of repression can also affect women. So the way the movie's set up is that these two men fall in love together over like a summer when they are on Brokeback Mountain, and they're like herding sheep as like their summer cowboying job. And then before this, they like have separate lives, and then they cross paths, and then they have to go their separate ways. And then like I think it's 4 years later they meet back up again and continue the affair, and then it's sort of they just have this on and off relationship. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is how it portrayed the effect on the different men's wives. It really shows, especially with the character of Alma, like her internal turmoil about like knowing her husband's cheating on her with a man, but like not really doing anything about it. And I also like that it doesn't show away from like showing how Ennis and Jack are like terrible fathers, and like how their secret is not just harming them and it's like making them long for a life they can't lead, but it's also like hurting the people in their lives. Like Ennis is a terrible father. He's like practically abandoning his children, and he is like emotionally neglecting his wife, and he's being like almost abusive to his wife because he's so angry about his situation. And like Jack is just checked out. He doesn't want to be there, and like his parents-in-law like don't want him either, so they just sort of like kind of leave each other alone. And like the wife is like very high strung and just like, you know, it's very business. I think in the movie they said they can do their marriage over the phone. A lot of gay movies treat the women who are like affected by this like romance as like disposable, and like their feelings don't matter. So I really like that Brokeback Mountain actually confronts the ugliness of like lying to your partner because you're in love with someone else, regardless of like the reasoning. And I think it's sympathetic to all its characters and critical to all of its characters at the same time. I think that the cinematography is beautiful and the soundtrack is beautiful. And I think that they did a really good job of like aging up the actors, like especially Jake Gyllenhaal. He starts off the film with no mustache. He looks very young, and there's like a lot of analysis people do about like the way he acts with his eyes. So he'll like look down a lot and be very bashful, and then in later scenes he's like very hard and like very like narrowed in his gaze, and he's got like a mustache.
So what we got now is Brokeback Mountain!
So not only did like they age him up physically, but the actors did a great job of just acting older and like really portraying that span of time. But this movie was sort of like a cultural phenomenon. Everyone like made fun of it. It's a very subversive gay movie. It's like the reason why I don't really have a problem with two straight actors playing these two gay characters is that the characters themselves are like very traditionally masculine, and that's sort of what the film is about, is like questioning what masculinity is and like what it means and like how it can hurt us, because these two like otherwise extremely stereotypical masculine men don't fit the one caveat to like live a normal straight heterosexual life. They like suffer for it, and ultimately ends up being like the downfall of them and their relationship. So overall, I think it's a really great movie. Give it a watch. Don't watch it if you don't want to cry, though.
Like I said, Brokeback came out in 2005, and I think that the time that it came out was very integral to its cultural impact. I mean, it was post 9/11, and there was sort of this Western resurgence happening anyway because of post 9/11 nationalism. And Brokeback Mountain was just sort of an honest look at what that type of rigid masculinity can do to a person, and how it can affect not only your relationship but your personhood. Right now it seems like the queer Western aesthetic has shifted from movies into music. Lil Nas X really comes to mind. It sort of reminds me of post 9/11 with Brokeback Mountain, as well as like the Trump administration with Old Town Road and how that came out in 2019. And then Lil Nas X later came out as gay, and then did a bunch of pranks on the Christians, trying to get them to think that he's a Satanist to sell more stuff. Fox News had a parade just ripping him to shreds every day, and I bet he made a ton of money off of them, as well as Beyonce's Cowboy Carter, which is coming straight off the heels of her Renaissance record. So, there's just a lot of different queer spaces in music, it seems, right now, especially with country music being so big. So I'm just really interested to see who the next gay cowboy will be and how many days they'll be featured on Fox News saying that they're corrupting all the children and everyone's gonna die. We'll have to see.
Howdy, folks. I'm happy to announce the finishing of this painting. So I'm going to talk you through sort of my inspirations and like what I was thinking about while I was making it. So I think this painting turned out really nicely. I am really happy with all the colors. I was originally going to have this be like a really strict color scheme of just purple and yellow, but as I was working on it, more colors crept in. You know how I am. I was always going to have pink in this piece. So once the paint came in, I just sort of all bets were off. I just used all colors. But I think that allowed for some really special moments. Like these highlights that are in this like really neon green, I think are really beautiful. And I really love this bright orange, like highlighting the horse's butt and these orange clouds. This is a painting representative of me and my sister. So these are actually of two horses that live in my backyard. The dog is freaking out. And I've been drawing cows, especially for years. Like cows used to be my favorite animal, and I used to draw them almost daily for a while. And I've already done a painting of a cow, so I wanted to make a horse version as well. And I don't know, I felt like paying homage to like my inner horse girl. I never was super into horses, but since I was like the art kid, I kind of hung out with like all the furry kids and the horse girls and like the theater kids, just sort of all the elementary school weirdos. We all sort of ran in a pack together and like drew and like red warrior cats together. So I was friends with a lot of horse girls. I never really got into them as much, I guess, because I'm allergic. I think that's part of it. But later I got super into cowboy stuff, so I just wasn't super into it when I was a kid. I'm really interested in like barbed wire. I like added this barbed wire to help with like the perspective. I'm really trying to work on perspective, and I don't know, this is just a super easy way to add it. And also I like the idea of it being about things being encased in different things and how that interacts with the stained glass / crystal diamond sky I have going on. So the sky up here represents a multitude of things. I have it in this like diamond shape in the middle, and then on this crescent moon there is a columbine flower. Columbine flowers can be found all throughout my work. The columbine is like the Colorado state flower, and I just think it's a really beautiful flower. I like how it's layered with like this normal flower, and then underneath it has like a second star-shaped flower. And I make a lot of work about being from Colorado, and it really influences my work, so I throw it in there a lot. So that's the reason with that. And the stained glass to me is, I've just always been very interested in stained glass. I think that it's got a really beautiful and rich history that I'm also interested in, with like dating back to like Catholicism and early Renaissance and Gothic art. But I also just, it always reminds me of like kitschy grandma. I remember growing up, my grandma had this beautiful lamp that was made out of stained glass. It's also just about like, thrift stores and kind of Western old Americana type imagery. And I really love this crystallization. It's like a common theme throughout my work, where I like to make it look like you're looking through a prism. And I think that goes along with all the colors that I choose. This dawn, I called it Dawns because my sister and I cannot stop listening to the song Dawns by Zach Bryan. I'm not like a huge Zach Bryan fan, and I just kind of always tend to name my pieces after sometimes songs or lyrics that inspire me, just because I listen to them a lot when I'm working, and they definitely influence my work. But it's not like fan art. It's more just like referencing a thing between my sister and I, where like that's our song that we scream along to in the car together. And one of our favorite things to do is just drive through like the mountains and go on day trips and adventures and listen to like country music or like folky music, because I'm never in the mood to listen to like country or folk or indie, or even when I'm in Rhode Island. I only listen to it in Colorado because I just feel like a cowboy in the great American West, so I need to choose music to match that aesthetic. And I really like kind of rhinestone cowboy music. My favorite artist is Orville Peck. I love his stuff. He's definitely not like a traditional country or folk or bluegrass singer. He's kind of like a very Lana Del Rey, like glamour type of country music that I really enjoy. The stained glass is also in the shape of a house because my sister and I grew up under the same roof. So this is like us two. This one is going to represent me because it's like on the pink side, and this one represents her because it's on like the blue side. My sister likes blue and I like pink. And she's eating because my sister likes to eat, I guess. And there's like a swallowtail. Those are common throughout all my work. And yeah, I just had so much fun breaking down all the different shapes and the shadows. And I really love how I grouped this big mass into this purple shadow, but there's still a lot of layers of color in here, and I'm really proud of that. And I'm really proud of how this orange glow came out, and I think that the lighting on the butt came out really nicely. So I'm really happy with this piece. As I've said in previous videos, I'm always thinking about where my art sort of fits in like art historical canon. That's sort of the brain poisoning that art school will do to you. If you take enough art history classes and you paint, you're gonna start thinking about how your paintings fit into like the greater canon of painting and whatever. So when I was thinking about this, I was really thinking about Western aesthetics and how masculine they are, because I think it's so funny how like the cowboy is like the ultimate American masculine symbol, and the number one lover of ponies is like little girls. And I was like grew up on My Little Pony, and I think it's just so interesting how like we assign like gender to different things when it doesn't make much sense to me. And country has always been like a very queer space. It's always been a very non-white space, and like the 50s Americana Western really whitewashed that and got rid of a lot of that history in a lot of people's minds. So I wanted to sort of pay homage to a more feminine aesthetic of the West, because I grew up in Colorado and I went around looking at all these art fairs and seeing all these different painters do all their, like grizzly cowboys and stuff. And like could never really relate to the imagery being made of the place that I'm from. So I'm always on a mission to represent my Colorado how I see it, because I feel like there's a missing perspective on what it can feel like to grow up somewhere that does have this cowboy culture as someone who's a bit more kind of fun and flouncy and feminine. It sort of has this like Barbie fairy tale aesthetic going on to it, which I really enjoy. And I think that pairs nicely with the sparkles. And overall, I'm just really happy with this piece. But yeah, that about does it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I read every single one. Make sure to like and subscribe and do all the YouTuber things. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you don't have a question, just let me know how your day went or something. Like and subscribe and do all the YouTuber things. Like I said, I'm a super small channel, so it helps me out a lot, more than you ever know. This video is sponsored by my Etsy store. If you like prints of this or any other works, they're all there. And I think that's it. Have a good one, partner. Bye.